But when we were preparing for this, we thought, it'd be great on each of these sections to have headlines. And we talked about some, we had some funny ones. The one I came up for this was, spies wimp out. Grasshoppers get 40 years. And, it's sort of a challenge how to do this. It's kind of like I like to do a play. It's so dramatic. But it just wasn't going to work out in the time. But what I thought was, I've come up what I call the Kadesh syndrome. And it's really three things, and there's a fourth one that we'll talk about at the end here. But the three things is, first, the base camp. This is where you have your support and strength. And of course, I want us to think beyond just the spies, but they had this wonderful base camp. And can you imagine? I mean, they had the pillar, the cloud, the Shekinah cloud. God was there. They had the tabernacle. They had the Holy of Holies. They had the covenant of the ark. They had the great leader Moses. They had their family and their friends. They were there, all surrounded by them. And now it's time. They're so close to the promised land that Moses, God said, we need to send some spies in there just to find out something about the fortifications so we can plan our attack and so on. So they pick one person from each of the 12 tribes and they send them out. And these 12 men are holy men. They have all this support and strength, and they go into the next stage, which I call the foreign land, where we have challenge and we're going to stretch, right? 150, 200, they go 250 miles up into Canaan, all the way up almost to the border of where today, up above the Sea of Galilee. Takes them 40 days, familiar 40 days, Christ in the wilderness 40 days, the ark was 40 days. I don't know, 40 days are a favorite quantity for trying times. But they go up there and they're all together. They will see in chapter 13, they come back and they confirm it is a land full of wonderful produce. In fact, they find grapes that are so big that it takes 2 men with a pole to carry them. These grapes are so luscious. And today, that 2 men carrying grapes on a stick is a logo for the Israeli tourism department. But at any rate, so they find these grapes, they find the produce, they find all these good things. They find the great shrine. If there is one national shrine for these people, it's Hebron. That's where Abraham's bones are buried. That's where Joseph wants his bones carried. And they find Hebron. They find all these wonderful things. But they come back, and what is it that they're seeing there? Do they see things with the eyes of trust and belief? They have had God's promises. That's part of their strength, that they can take this land. But no, they get there, and you know what happens? They start worrying. And think about ourselves. We leave our families, we leave our homes, we leave our church. We have all this support. We go out in the world, and we meet different people. We meet bosses we don't like. We run into relationships that we're trying to make work. We're doing all these things. And, are we remembering all these great strengths that we have? Or do we forget? Do we start to lose our self-confidence? Do we begin to get rattled? Do we begin to get worried? All these things start to work on us, and we begin to see things in a different way. And that's what happens here. What we need, just look at chapter 13. When these spies come back, look at in chapter 13, verse 25. At the end of the 40 days, they come back, and then down, I'm actually looking at verse, I guess it's 27. It says, it does indeed flow. They say, it does indeed flow with milk and honey. This is its produce. And then they show the people all that they brought. And then in the Jerusalem Bible, it says, at the same time, NIV says, but, B-U-T, but, and there's a lot of buts here, because they've seen and they agree with what Caleb and Joshua have found, but at the same time, its inhabitants are powerful people. The towns are fortified and very big, yes, and so on and so forth. And then in verse 30, Caleb says harangued, in NIV it says silence the people. He said, we must march in, he said, and conquer this land. You know, don't be put off by what these other guys are saying. But the men who had gone up with him answered. And just, you know, we sort of think these Hebrews are so lame. But you know, imagine how we might think. We are not able to march against this people. They are stronger. How often do we suddenly forget everything that we have of strength because we think someone else is stronger, has more intelligence, whatever it might be? And they go on and say, but the men, they are stronger than we are, and they began to disparage the country. You know, they just said it's a beautiful place. Now they begin to belittle it. They begin to kind of make it seem like it's not important. They try to shrink things down so that they don't have to go up into this land. And then they say, later on here, say, you know, every man we saw there, notice exaggeration. That's what we do. When we're uncomfortable, we start exaggerating. Every man we saw there was enormous size. And then finally, at the end of the chapter, it says, we felt like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. They have talked themselves in to being grasshoppers when they had all this strength behind them. This is what happens when we go into new lands, challenges and so forth. And when they come back to camp, what is it they do? Are they bold or are they grasshoppers? And unfortunately, 10 of the 12 have become grasshoppers. They have become weak and afraid, and they have forgot. You know, someone said once, it's better to look up than around us. And that's what happened with these 10. Instead of looking up to God and believing in all the strength they had, they looked around and they compared themselves. And before long, they talked themselves in like so many of us do. You know, we run into addictions. We come back to camp. We return to the things that have bothered us, that have addicted us, that have made us small. And we believe and we forget the strength that we had. Now, when God hears this, what happens is the people start murmuring and they want to stone Caleb and Joshua, the two brave people. And that happens in verse 10 of chapter 14. The entire community was talking of stoning them. When they started thinking about stoning them, Yahweh comes in like this. He is so angered to stone these great two people that kept the promise and belief. And he comes in, he says, you know what? I've had it. Not only do you not believe, but you are treating me with contempt. You've rejected me. And for that, all of you 10, all of the men will no longer go into the promised land. You will wander for 40 years with everybody else. The children will be spared. There will be a new generation. But this generation will not go into the promised land, except Caleb and Joshua, the two courageous spies.